It's a real joy to welcome Father Silviu for talk 2 in our Lenten enrichment series tonight, talking about the Liturgy of St. Basil. Thank you, Father.
Thank you. Before I begin, actually, this morning, remember the note on which we ended up yesterday's talk, our conversation, that Christ is everything. And lo and behold, Father Matthew Peter, my dear friend, sends me a quote, which is on topic, right? And it's a story, it's from the Anonymous Sayings of the Desert Fathers, so 4th century text, thereabouts. And it's a story of this elder who has a very strict rule of fasting, and he eats very, very little. And another brother visits, and he serves him what he eats. And the brother at the end says, well, this is all, give me more. So he feeds him more. But of course, judging. He's like, really? This is how you fast? And then, the next day he continues his rule, but so far with the little he was eating, he was okay. But now, he gets weak. And he forces himself not to drop the rule, to keep it. But as he keeps it, he gets more and more weak. And he realizes he needs to eat more. And at the moment, an angel appears to him. And he tells him the following. Bear this in mind. One who is able to fast or to do any other good things does not do it by virtue of his power. It is the goodness of God that gives the man the strength. Right? He was right on topic. Anyway, so what a coincidence. And then he sent me something else from St. Patrick, by the way, to the exact same point. So 2 texts on the exact same point on which we ended last night. So what a blessing it was. Anyway, to read those 2 texts. Today, I was asked to talk about the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil. And I typed it up because, as I said, I'm still a little bit tired and foggy, so I don't trust myself to be able to present freely as I did 3 years ago. And I got older too. Remember what I said yesterday about this fundamental temptation to approach things in a detached manner. And also about how generally our questions need to be revised in light of that. So that the question, for example, right, what does the Divine Liturgy mean, should be abandoned for another question. What does the Divine Liturgy reveal about my life? I would like to continue today in this train of thought, so to speak. My focus is somewhat different from yesterday because I was asked to discuss a different liturgy altogether. Yesterday was the Liturgy of the Pre-Sanctified Gifts, today the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil. But the field, the plane, is pretty much the same. Let me begin again with a brief history of the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil with the same caveat, the same warning that I'm not a liturgist, but I got this from from people who know what they're talking about. It has the exact same order, as you know, the exact same of ekphonesis, the out loud parts that the priest says, and the exact same choir responses as the Divine Liturgy of St. John, with the sole exception actually of the Megalinarion of the Theotokos, of the particular of God, on the choir side. Anyway, and then the introduction of the words of the institution at the anaphora for the priests. Moreover, it is entirely identical to the Liturgy of St. John for its first half. That is, 10 of the 19 prayers sent by the priest are the same, and they're all at the beginning. It actually becomes different as soon as the catechumens are dismissed. Then it becomes different, after the opening of the Elysion. The prayers specific to it are significantly more extensive, as you will be reminded tomorrow. It's a longer liturgy, because the prayers are longer. Anyway, what I call the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil are those parts which are specific to the Liturgy of St. Basil. Right? Not the parts that it has in common with the Liturgy of St. John. These parts which are unique to the Liturgy of St. Basil probably do go back to Cappadocia. At least the anaphora prayer liturgies would say they go back to Cappadocia. Did they go back to the 4th century at least? Do they go back to St. Basil himself? It's difficult to establish, right? Because there's very little evidence about these things. Now, by the 7th century, it was served throughout the Byzantine Empire on all Sundays and feasts. So the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil was the liturgy, right? It was, as a famous liturgist put it, it was the most official liturgy of the Byzantine liturgical tradition. And actually, the liturgy of St. John was only served on weekdays. On Sundays and feasts, it was only the liturgy of St. Basil. After the 9th century or thereabouts, it comes to be used only a few times a year. 10 times, 11 times, or 14 times. There's different Byzantine practices at that point. More often than not, we serve it 10 times. That's the one we inherited. But it can be served according to Byzantine practice, according to up to 14 times a year. Okay. It has a specific character, and which makes it, as Elder Milanos Yeronda put it, and I quote, lively. By the way, the liturgy of St. John took over because the liturgy of St. John is lively, comfortable, familiar, quick, and full of spiritual sunlight. Okay. I don't think it had anything to do with length. It was something else. It was the character of the liturgies. There's a perception that the liturgy of St. Basil has a nighttime or vigil character, probably because early on it was served on feasts which had vigils. In the Byzantine practice, only certain feasts had vigils. They weren't doing vigils every Sunday as we do. Right? In the Russian tradition, it's being done. Right? So these days it is still served together with Vespers, but it is not truly an evening, a vigil liturgy. It's just the liturgy. It's very important to keep that in mind. Anyway, as I said, every liturgy has its own character. So what is the character of the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil? Yeronda Emilianos again said the following. This liturgy creates for us a rational and clear reawakening, a royal path which graciously embraces the good, the evil, the childish, the youth, the elderly, the faint-hearted, the scattered, the deluded, the helpless, the despairing, and everyone in need of God's great compassion. So, to go back to my opening question, with all these things in mind, with this history in mind and the character in mind, what meanings of our life can be discerned in the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil? And just like yesterday, I will focus on 3. First, there is a fundamental thing to be said about the liturgy as I studied yesterday, and that is the fact that it is a relocation of ours into heaven. The liturgy relocates us to heaven regardless of our preparation. It is simply what the liturgy does. Of course, our experience of it is entirely dependent on our preparation, but whether it happens or not, that's not a question. It happens. The liturgy takes us into heaven. And that is being put forth most clearly by the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil, much more than any other. We see this fundamental thing immediately, by the way, as soon as the Eucharistic prayer part of the liturgy begins. In the Divine Liturgy of St. John, the first priestly prayer after the great entrance is short. But not so in the Liturgy of St. Basil. The prayer asks as follows, and sorry, I'm going to follow my own translation here, which you may not be familiar with. So I quote, Lord, be well pleased that we become servants of your New Testament, ministers of your holy mysteries. According to the magnitude of your mercy, receive us as we draw near to your holy altar, so that we become worthy to offer you this reasonable and unbloody sacrifice for our own sins and for the unknowing errors of your people. End quote. And then the prayer asks for our sacrifices to be received just as were received the sacrifices of Abel, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Aaron, Samuel, and finally the apostles. And I quote, so that, having been counted worthy to liturgize blamelessly at your holy altar, we gain the reward of faithful and wise stewards on the fearful day of your righteous recompense. End quote. This prayer makes it very clear that in the liturgy we are being placed in a new location. The relocation into heaven takes us in front of the holy table, the divine throne, upon which we see the divine glory, who is Christ. But this location is an integration, a making of a community, the production of a church. This integration is the first thing which the liturgy of St. Basil reveals about our life, because that's the first prayer, right? Let us for a second analyze our lives and let us admit that we are together truly. We gather in the earnest, as it were, only here in this place. This is the place that truly brings us together. The further away we move from the holy place, from the altar, the more divided we are. Of course, we realize this only to the extent to which we have prepared for the divine liturgy, as I said yesterday and just a few minutes ago. But even with the smallest preparation, we discovered this to be true. Moreover, this community, which is formed in that place, and only in that place, is not made only of us, but rather this integration which forms only in front in that place, again, only there, is a community which reaches down in time to the very beginning of our relationship with Christ. It reaches all the way back to the apostles, to the prophets, to the patriarchs, to Moses and Abraham, and even to the ancestors of all humanity, Noah and Abel. We stand with them as one body, as one location, as one request to God to be allowed to be in that place, in that location in the first place. And if we ask ourselves why we are all truly together as one body, one life, in this location, and only in this location, and in no other, the liturgy of St. Basil illumines us again. And with this illumination, it reaches even more deeply into our souls, into our lives. It says, this place is our gathering because in front of the divine face we are being revealed, and only there we experience deeply the reality that we have done nothing good upon the earth. And that's part of the Eucharistic prayer of the Liturgy of St. Basil. Not one of us. Do you remember the list from Elder Milaus? The good, the evil, the childish, the youth, the elder, the faint-hearted, all of those. Not one of us has ever done anything good upon the earth. Why is this powerful cry, this fundamental and crushing realization of ours, which nevertheless places us like nothing else in front of the divine throne, why is it expressed in this peculiar way upon the earth? Because this cry, or rather the reality which this cry expresses, includes not only us here today, and everyone else, by the way, who will join us tomorrow morning at the Liturgy of St. Basil, right? It's not only us, today and tomorrow, but, and this is very clear in light of that first prayer that opens the Liturgy of St. Basil, it includes Abel, whose sacrifices Christ loved so much. And it includes Noah, whose sacrifices Christ taught him. It includes Moses and Aaron, who were allowed to enter the first holy tabernacle, and the apostles who walked with Christ and who died with him. They too with us, and with St. Basil himself, this great royal dwelling and priesthood, this is what we call him in his own Apolitikion, right? They too with us have done nothing good upon this earth. This cloud of witnesses standing in front of the throne of Christ, they witness to him precisely, right, by speaking to this fundamental truth about themselves, about ourselves, right? And this choir, by the way, includes, as the Eucharistic prayer of St. Basil says again, all the saints who from of old have been well-pleasing to you. Moreover, already here and now, on this side of death, and at this moment in our own gathering, during the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil, this cloud of witnesses includes all the people who will ever live, as the special petition for the forgiveness on the Sundays of All Souls says. It's a beautiful, powerful prayer. Father Justin actually brought up. We ask for the forgiveness of all those who will ever live. They too, our children's children, whom we wish we could only imagine, we could only picture, right? Let alone converse with, are here with us right now in this church, in this location, before Christ, as ones who they also will have done nothing good upon the earth, regardless of how they will live. And if we ask again ourselves why this is true, that we all get all together, all people of all times, past times, present times, future times, have done nothing good upon the earth, once more we find the answer in the Liturgy of St. Basil. As soon as we, the faithful, present ourselves to Christ, we offer a prayer for the faithful at the beginning of the Liturgy of St. Basil. And he says, you, O Christ, are the one who works all things in all. End quote. Christ works all things in all, which means that he is the source of all the good in all the people and through all the people. In another prayer which the priest says, and this is common to the liturgy of St. John, I admit, at the entrance with the gospel, the little entrance, he calls Christ straightforwardly goodness. Moreover, the prayer I read earlier from the liturgy of St. Basil indicates that there is even more to this integration, this union which we experience in front of Christ alone, that there is another member in our gathering, in this body which stands in front of us of the divine throne in the liturgy. At this prayer, the prayer of the entrance, we say, the priest says, more often than not in low voice, right? Master, Lord our God, who have set upright in the heavens orders and armies of angels and archangels for the liturgy of your glory, cause that with our entrance there be an entrance of holy angels, co-liturgizing and glorifying your goodness with us. What does it mean that we glorify Christ as goodness, not only on our own, but together with the angels? It means, first and foremost, that he is their goodness too. This is why they also liturgize. They liturgize continuously without ceasing in the only place to liturgize, in front of his face, because they too have done nothing good upon their own earth, in their own sphere of creation. They liturgize because they have no goodness in themselves, because their goodness is him. Our liturgy, as it arrives at the same location, ours and theirs, right, recognizes this. This is our union, our gathering, together with all the saints and all the sinners of all times, and all the angels. And this is why it can happen, and it does happen, only in front of Christ's throne. Christ is the only good in all things and in all people. Our own dust in front of Christ becomes a holy gathering, a holy communion. It becomes church. This is the primary meaning of church, by the way, that we are gathered together in this one place, in this one reality. Not simply by a gathering of volitions or of wills, as John Locke would have it. John Locke came up in earlier discussions today. This brings me to the second point. The second meaning of my life, revealed by the service. The liturgy of St. Basil frames the oneness of humanity in front of Christ in the mystery of Christ, or in the mystery of the divine plan, like no other liturgy. It inscribes our disintegration that I talked about, this communion, this forming of communion, in the character of Christ himself. So even this gathering only happens in Christ. And it does this in the clearest terms and at length, much more than the liturgy of St. John does, in the prayer of the Eucharist. And I'm going to quote a big chunk of it, but you'll hear it tomorrow. If I survive the presider, I always say it out loud. The whole thing. It's long. Forgive me for being long tomorrow. See, I asked in advance. So now you do have to forgive me. I'm shrewd, aren't I? And when the fullness of time had come, you spoke to us through your Son himself, through whom you also created the ages, who being the radiance of your glory and the image of your being, upholding all things by the word of his power, did not think being equal to you, God and Father, a thing to be held on to. But being God before all ages, he appeared on earth and lived among men, and becoming incarnate of a holy virgin, he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, becoming conformed to the body of our lowliness, that he might make us conform to the image of his glory. For as by man sin entered into the world, and by sin death, so it pleased your only begotten Son, who was in the bosom of you, Father and God, born of a woman, the holy birth giver of God and ever Virgin Mary, born under the law, to condemn sin in his flesh, so that those who were dead in Adam might be made alive in your Christ himself. And living in this world, giving us commandments of salvation, turning us from the deceits of idols, he brought us to the knowledge of you, the true God and Father, obtaining us for himself as a treasured people, a royal dwelling, priesthood, a holy nation. And cleansing us in water and sanctifies with the Holy Spirit, he gave himself as a ransom to death, in which we were held captive and sold under sin, and descending through the cross into hell, so that he might fill all things with himself. He loosed the pangs of death, and rising on the third day, making for all flesh a path to the resurrection from the dead, since it was not possible for the source of life to be held by corruption. He became the first fruits of the fallen asleep, the firstborn of the dead, so that he is first all things in all. And ascending into heaven, he sat down on the right of your majesty on high, and he will come again to render to each according to his works. It's full of quotes from the New Testament, right? It's everywhere. Probably 80% is just all New Testament. What is this prayer saying overall? What is its general idea? If not that this is the character of Christ, to uphold us, or rather to take hold of us. That's the deeper meaning of the Greek word there. And of all things, this is his character, the way he thinks, as St. Paul says, Philippians 2. This is the mindset of God. Or the way he simply is. Because, as St. Paul says again, the mystery of Christ, God's embrace of us, is from before the ages. St. Maximus the Confessor asks that the one who understands this mystery knows the goal for which the world has been created, who understands Christ's character. This mystery is the essence of our liturgy, says St. Simeon of Thessaloniki. And this mystery is the fullness of time, the end goal for which time itself exists. That's the meaning of that expression. We usually read it backwards, as if things were being built up to, oh, there is Christ. No, Christ is the one that precedes everything. Right? And now we discover that Christ is the meaning of time by realizing we live in the fullness of time. The mystery of Christ explains what it means to say that we are bought, like this prayer says, and in the New Testament is being said too. And why we have been obtained at the fullness of time, another expression being used there. We have been obtained because we are a treasured people. Right? And that's really the meaning of the Greek word there. Right? Periousios, it's treasured, not a people of his own. That's a weird translation there. We are the pearl over which the heavenly man loses his head. We are the apple of Christ's eye. Sorry, this is Psalms, right? Psalms 16. But I told you, Psalms are fresh on my mind because I just finished translating them. We are the ones over which he thinks nothing of his divinity. As this one says, this is again Philippians 2. He thinks that his divinity is something to drop for our sake. He'll just drop it. It's like human divinity. Human without a second thought. Right? As this prayer itself says, it repeats the exact same imagery which is in Philippians 2. It is as if the Son of God is an arrow in whose nature it is to shoot out of the divine bow, and the target is us. Another imagery out of the Psalms. This focus on God, on us, on our being targets of eternal life, is at once our valuation as treasures and our being bought. This is what buys us, the fact that he focuses on us. As soon as his greatness focuses on smallness, we are bought. The cross is only an expression of this, but the cross is not atonement. The cross is a sign of what has happened from before all ages, that we to him mean everything. Right? This is our worthiness, as the common English word goes, which is to say that this is what we are worth, our price, our value. Christ's eternal and infinite desire for us, which goes, and I quote here, this is again Philippians, as far as death, even death on a cross. Right? It is now clear that worthy, by the way, I hope, has nothing to do with deserving, right? With meriting. There is no such thing. Our value is the price that has been paid for us, which is Christ's infinite desire. This brings me to my third and final point, also built on the above text from the Eucharistic prayer, specifically on the revelation of Christ as all things in all, which is also in Colossians, if I remember. As the one who feels all things with himself, as the prayer said. The Liturgy of St. Basil not only puts this revelation in front of us in no unclear terms, but it even marks the path to carry it out in our own hearts, in our own lives. This revelation, he says, is not a reality which follows the second coming. Christ all in all. And this is a very important point, because that passage in Colossians, very few non-Orthodox know the Liturgy of St. Basil. But of course they will know Colossians. But how do they read the passage? It's a post-second coming realization, Christ all in all. And the Liturgy of St. Basil makes it clear that it isn't. It is a present reality. It is the reality of this mixing of divinity and earth accomplished in the incarnation, death, and resurrection of Christ. This is a great mystery that our fathers understood, and they passed down to us in many ways through the scriptures, their teachings, their liturgy, and supremely in their joining with us in our own worship at all times, standing in the same location in which we stand. And this is the mystery which plays out and is said out loud, particularly in the Divine Liturgy of St. Basil. For example, St. Paul speaks of this not as a future reality, right? But an existing one, unveiled in recognition, he says, in Colossians, if I remember correctly. Right? And it's unveiled in the baptized. In the baptized, in which there is no Greek, nor, the whole, right? No Jew, circumcision, uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, right? Slave, free, anyway. But it is Christ. All things in all. This reality unveiled in the baptized is what we call kingdom. It is the substance of our existence and of our life. It is the substance of the world to come, and which we put out already here and now visibly in our liturgical life, both in the body and outside of the body, for the entire creation to see and to partake of it. We unveil to this world, as St. Paul says somewhere, by the way, Romans, we unveil this to the world. The world starves for this unveiling of Christ as all in all. The world wants to be reminded, everything that surrounds us, right? This plastic, this piece of plastic wants to be reminded that it too is okay. Right? And this is what it groans for. All creation, everything surrounding us groans for this. And this is our location in creation, to show this piece of plastic, you are okay. Right? You too are a piece of Christ. Right? Let me point out now in the end that this thing, Christ, all things in all, is not a theoretical thing. It is not a revelation or a realization in the sense that it comes about as a thought, as an insight in the realm of our intellections. It may begin there, but it isn't that. On the contrary, it is a realization as in making real, or rather as in being real. This realization plays out in the inner struggles of our soul, in the gaining of the proper relationship with our own suffering and death, which is our preparation for the liturgy, our spiritual life. As Geron and Emilianos love to point out, this is the substance of spiritual life, coming to the proper relationship to our own suffering and death. To go back to the Psalms, I told you, they're fresh on my mind. This is the realization at which the psalmist arrives and which he expresses so powerfully in Psalm 22. This is, the Septuagint, the Greek numbering. As much as he has spent his life in the hell of being abandoned, of feeling hopeless, of being broken, he comes to experience viscerally, deep down in the twists and turns of his heart, that he has always been shepherded. And by the way, that's a verb, that's not a noun. To me, that's a big mistake to say, the Lord is my shepherd. It's not the same thing as to say, the Lord shepherds me, which is exactly what the Greek says. Right? And that's a very important point. Why do I say it's a big mistake? Because I suspect it's precisely to this imagery when the Lord appeals to, when he makes the point that I am a different sort of shepherd than the shepherds are having. Right? I'm not just a paid hand that will run away when the wolf comes. I am shepherding you. Right? Anyway, so, and also, this is him. In the midst of the shadow of death, you are with me. He screams to Christ. You have beaten me often. Many times I have felt your rod and your staff. And what a comfort is the touch of you, my God. I have been chased. I have been hunted down. And that's the true meaning of the verb used there, to be hunted down, not to be pursued. I have been trodden underfoot, smashed to the ground, crushed and shattered, all the way down into the pit, to the bottom of darkness and despair, even more than I can bear. And behold, O Lord, it has been your mercy all along. In this realization, everything comes in a different light. One's whole life changes in the sense that it receives meaning, that the past as well as the future, everything in our entire life, loss, pain, suffering, death, everything is filled instantly with Christ. This is what is so readily put out in front of us by the psalmist and also by the liturgy of St. Basil when he says, you, O Christ, are the one who works all things in all, as I quoted earlier. To revisit now at the end Geronda's idea with which I started, this royal path which graciously embraces all of us, all people, which embraces the entire lives of each one of us, this divine liturgy, just as it happens here between these walls, it nevertheless includes all creation. It leads us to all living things, or rather to all things which exist, or even more, It intersects and contains all things which exist. This is what happens in front of Christ, where the liturgy has gathered us. Where, as St. Paul says, by the way, there is no Greek, no division. This is the completion of all things. And therefore, this place, this location, our gathering, our liturgy, is the place in which, according to the Eucharistic prayer, all those fallen asleep in the hope of resurrection rest. That is the place where the light of your face watches over them, as we say. This is also the place in which, by the way I pointed out yesterday, God rests. In front of each other, we are both at rest. He and we rest together, in the presence of each other, or rather within each other, as divinity and humanity rest in Christ. Christ is nothing else but the realization of this mystery. This is an eternal reality both to God and to us. We stare at our life, and our life is hung. Right? Sacrifice and food, as the scripture says. And this is the Septuagint from Deuteronomy 22. Your life will be hung before your eyes. This mutual inclusion between us and God, His rest and our rest, is the completion of creation. Our fathers point out again and again and again. The ultimate realization of Genesis 2:4. It is the seventh day on which God truly rests. To conclude, remember the question with which I began both of my presentations. How does the divine liturgy of the Pre-Sanctified or of St. Basil today reveal my life? Yesterday, from the divine liturgy of the Pre-Sanctified gifts, we drew these three fruits, these three meanings: that Christ is among us and within us, that we have no life or salvation in ourselves, that we are needful, but Christ is the life in our salvation, and finally, that Christ is the only thing we truly need. Today, from the liturgy of St. Basil, we have drawn three more fruits, on the way to discover, as Yoronda put it, the royal path which embraces all. Namely, that we all share an indelible oneness in front of Christ's throne. 2, that this happens in Christ's own character, which is also our worthiness, our value. And 3, that this reveals His presence in all things, in our entire life, words and all. Thank you. Sorry for going on a little bit long.
And if last night's any indication, the questions are as fruitful as the talk. So are there any questions for Father? Of any sort? About the liturgy first, and other things too.
Oh, please. Sorry.
In what way is Christ all in all? And who is all?
It's...
Did you repeat the question?
the question was, sorry, in what way is Christ all in all? Yes, sorry. Because you are facing this way, I'm facing that. My concern, and I made this clear yesterday, but I'll repeat it today. My concern is that we approach the scriptures, everything in the scriptures, as teaching. And by that I mean something that simply informs me, as opposed to revelation, which means it's something that reveals something already existing, right? This is deeper than simply a teaching, a passing down of data. And this Christ is all in all for me, rather than trying to abstract it in God knows what different ways. I think it is very important for me to come to this realization as an experiential crisis, as an existential crisis. Right? Probably this is the essence of the Christian faith. It means to have a crisis, to be at a critical point. Well, actually, there's 2 critical points in my life, truly. And they are, as this morning this came up in our discussions. These are the only 2 decisions I make in my life. And the first one is when I have a sense, many times looking in the mirror, many times looking in my own life at things that have recently happened in my life events, right? That actually I have puffed myself up. But I'm really not what I want others to think that I am, right? When I realize that all these things on which all these crutches I've been using for my own psychological help, right, needs, I'm actually beautiful. I'm actually handsome. I'm smart. I'm not that dumb, right? Or I'm a good guy. I have done something good, right? There's this moment. It's many times Christ brings us to this crossroads repeatedly because He wants us to take the right way at that moment. These moments come when I realize that it's all shallow, it's all empty. And that's when I take a decision. The first decision of my spiritual life is this one. What do I do with this insight, with this hint that Christ gives me? And if I brush it aside, if I fix it, or I build myself up even more, as, for example, postmodernity constantly advises us to do, but confidence and, tell yourself, I'm really wonderful, am I not? All of the affirmation, right? That's the technical term on it. If I do that, then I miss the access to the second crossroad. But if I say, I am nothing. Christ, you are everything. You are everything to me. I don't realize what that means yet, right? All I know is that I am nothing. But so therefore I conclude that He is everything. That makes me turn to Him. Now I face Him. I no longer face myself. I have this need for Him. So I keep screaming and crying and punching. It's a boxing match with Christ all the time. Okay, so that brings me to the answer to your question. Sorry about going at it the long way. Suddenly I come to the second crossroad of my life. And the second crossroad is I've been punching and screaming for God knows how long. Weeks, months, years, decades. Many people spend almost their entire life, or many people spend their whole life. They are never brought to the second crossroad. They never get themselves there, right? To the second intersection. Regardless of when it comes, if it comes, what it comes is the ultimate form of being crushed. You look back and you realize I've been punching you and screaming at you and pulling you, and you haven't showed yourself up to me. So then, this is my second crossroad. What do I do? And at that moment, if I don't give up, if I don't say, heck with this, I'm done. But I continue having my whole life as a prayer, which is what the psalmist does. He turns everything into a prayer. Even when he's angry, he says it to Christ. I am pissed. Okay? It's a prayer. If that moment I continue to pray, I am being revealed that Christ is all in all things. So what that does mean deeply, right? So not as a teaching about, God knows, it's kind of a doctrinal reality, but deeply in me. I look back at my life and I realize it's been you all along, hasn't it? Like the story of Job came up in our morning discussions. You gave me my kids and you took them away. You gave me this body and you made me healthy and you helped it grow. But you made me sick. Right? It's a grappling with, this is the real grappling with the fact that, again, not only that I am nothing, I've come to realize that earlier on, but to the fact that Christ is everything. Right? And this is when I get the real sense of what everything in the Scripture means and how everything ties in together. That Christ is love, 100%, and yet He is anger. Because I've experienced His presence in all these different ways. As I said, you have built me up, and I know you love me. But my Lord, you have crushed me so many times. And I know you love me, but it feels like anger to me. And this is not anger, it's simply the presence of God. Right? It is, this morning I used in some discussions, sorry, to appeal to discussions to which you haven't been part. This is what happens when the Lion of Judah stands in front of an ant. The earth shakes, and I stagger, and I wobble, and I fall, I trip, I fall on the side, and I scratch myself, and I hurt. But it's simply His presence. This is what it means to be hunted down by His mercy. There's no other way in which His mercy can act. Not because His mercy wants to destroy me, no. And again, all of a sudden I realize I haven't been destroyed at all along. This is how it felt to me. It may have felt to me like, this is it, I'm being destroyed, right? Utterly, I could even say. But it isn't. It's my building up. My building up in this great mystery, which is the fact that Christ makes His kingdom out of dust. And those two realities stand together at the same time. It's not like dust is being done away with. We are dust turned into eternity. Do you see? So I'm struggling to give an answer because it's not a matter of teaching, it's a matter of my life, right? Sorry, Father.
No, I think it fits with this question. One of the pastoral problems that I deal with, Father, is people who hear these words, I am nothing, and they interpret that, and they are crushed, but not in a godly way. Maybe it's self-hate, or it's a feeling of being lost. On paper, it is, I've done nothing good upon the earth, but spiritually it's something very different.
It's different.
Can you address that a little bit? Because it's a major problem among people coming that I encounter, and people that are really hurt, and they've been told they don't have value, they're nothing, but not in the way you mean.
Not in
Can
the
you
way
address
I mean.
that?
Not in the way I mean. Right. Because what I mean, there is a radical difference between this existential crisis and psychological trauma. Like yesterday, I spoke against going through our spiritual life as it's being presented to us by the scriptures, by the fathers, by the mothers of the church, right? And psychological trauma or drama, right? It's not these are radically different. Do you know why? And what's the ultimate tell? That at least anyway, the people that have got there, that have been at both crossroads, they have been telling me, they said there's nothing more peaceful. So how can you tell the difference? If you arrive at that moment when you realize deeply down, through an existential crisis, not a psychological drama, that I am nothing, my goodness, there is this explosion of joy. There's this taking over, how should I say, of peace, right? Peace takes over me. I struggle. I continue to struggle because, I'm getting sick and my body's falling apart, and for whatever reasons, I continue to struggle with my life. But there's this thing that just grabs me because all of a sudden I have at least arrived at a conclusion. I have gained an insight, if anything else, to put it in simple terms, right? Let's not go any deeper than that. But I have I have come to this conclusion that nothing is ultimately against me. Right? Nothing is against me. That my battle is not with any enemy. My battle is with this God who loves me infinitely. Right? That's what I mean by an existential crisis. It's not a battle with confidence, God forbid. It's not a battle with myself. And I don't get there by judging myself, by condemning myself. Because why? Because this existential crisis, this decision at this crossroad, comes with the realization, among other things, that I don't belong to myself. It's the opposite of the substance of our psychological drama. Our psychological drama, more often than not, let's admit, is actually being based on self-mastery, on the sense that we are supposed to handle ourselves and to handle our own life, that we're supposed to succeed, that I'm supposed to build myself up. In whatever psychological terms you want to put it, confidence, right? Affirmation, as Father says.
Success.
This is radically different. So one thing is to have an existential crisis. It's an ontological discovery, as opposed to a prying into my own life and inquisitively and self-condemnatory and without any confidence. Right? Or actually with fake confidence, right? Because I have to make up for the fact that I see that I'm failing. And therefore I make up by building, and I create this extraordinary tension in me, this ongoing psychological battle. This is not what it is. This is just existential. Yes?
So is there a way that you can help people who are experiencing psychological trauma from having been told since childhood that they were worthless?
Well, yes, I'm certain there's a way. But more often than not, I think we go about it the wrong way. Why? Because more often than not, we try to help them from precisely the same position in which they are. And I think Christ said several things about that. Some people who don't see, leading other people who don't see. Yesterday this came up. There was a question, and in response to the question, I made a point. I may be wrong. Forgive me if I'm wrong, so scratch everything I'm saying. That we may be tempted to split our life, to parse it, to scatter it into thousands and thousands of questions, which don't come from the gospel, by the way. So how am I supposed to be a good help, for example? Right? And that question, by starting my desire to help with such questions, I'm already going the wrong way. Why? Because I have turned away from Christ. But all these different questions come down to is a turn away from Christ. And unfortunately, this is how we are being built today. In modernity and postmodernity, we're not only fluidized, we become fluids, right? They want us to be very fluid. But also, everything around us wants to compartmentalize us and to split us up into bits and pieces. And yesterday I said straightforwardly, Christ is one. The gospel is one. Christian life is very simple. Strangely enough, the solution to everything is not to wonder what is the solution to everything. Because the moment I set up, regardless of my walk of life, right, I set up with this question, such as, what is the proper way to be a good father? What is the proper way to be a good priest? What is the proper way to be a good help, right, to someone who struggles? I'm already setting myself up for failure. The solution to everything is Christ. Right? This is how the Gospels and the commandments and everything are given to us. They're given to us as our help, our solution. This is why they don't get lost in all these millions and millions of pieces into which we split our lives. What makes me a good help to others? But Christ, what does he say? You be gentle. You be meek. Right? You be peacemakers. You have endurance because you will gain your souls in endurance. Patience, right? Hypomone. That's the solution. So here we are spending our whole lives looking for manuals. And of course we go to the gospel and we're disappointed because lo and behold, Christ never talks about how to be a good therapist. Ooh, what a big letdown. So therefore we go for the 21st century. But then we wonder why things don't work. Because we have just kicked away the solution. And yesterday I made the point, sorry for repeating it, but there are many of you here today who weren't here yesterday. Yesterday I made the point that strangely enough, I grew up in that world. I grew up in a pre-medieval world with my grandparents, as I said. And I never saw them processing themselves in their own identity in the ways in which I am tempted to do constantly. Simply because they lived in a pro-medieval world. And here I was, within my own lifetime. I've gone over 1,400 years of human life. Actually, they were pre-Augustinian. So I've spent my lifetime over a chunk of 1,700 years. Right? I was raised by people who lived in the 4th century and before, who truly lived in gospel times. And here I am in postmodernity. Right? So how did they live their life? I had no sense on them, to give an example, that they ever wondered, they ever processed even such questions as, which are constantly on my mind, what makes me a good grandparent? They raised me for the first few years, so they were like my parents, right? My dad and mom. I always called them dad and mom, my grandparents, right? They never did that. I could tell that their focus was on Christ always. And that's what made them good parents. Strangely enough. They didn't go through any psychological drama. I had no sense that they ever, felt bad that, oh my goodness, like my grandfather was missing so often, because he was a peasant. He was working the fields many times till 10 p.m., right? Coming home, it's like, I haven't spent any time with this kid today. Why? Because he was so tired, all he could do was eat and go to bed. And all I could do, right, for me, actually, was to just look at him eat. He wouldn't even talk to me for 5 minutes. But there was no drama on his side, there was no drama on my side. At least back then. Today, when I don't spend enough time with my daughter, I go through all this psychological crap, right? And actually, it's not useful. Why isn't it useful? Because it doesn't put me at peace. And if I'm not at peace, how will I possibly give her peace? Because peace is not something that works with words. More often than not, peace is something that works with the inside. And if my inside is not at peace, how would I give her peace? And actually, those 5 minutes with my grandfather were enough. I never had a sense that he doesn't spend enough time with me, or I don't spend enough time with him. It was, the whole eternity was was present in those 5 minutes. I spent an eternity of time, an age in those 5 minutes, because he was at peace. But his life was never focused on me. He never gave me a sense that his life, that I'm his life. No, Christ was his life. And that's what made him just a wonderful father. Or dad, I should say. Right? And here we are, struggling with being a good father, and lo and behold, and to me it's not a coincidence. When you think about it, it may be counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense, deeply. We are crappy fathers. Because we spend our whole life torturing ourselves over how to be good fathers. Strangely enough, right? Paradoxically. But that's how it works. So how are we good therapists to others? By gaining Christ in our lives, in ourselves. So therefore, by not even starting with the question, how am I being a good help to someone else? That's not the question. Christ said this straightforwardly, there is one needful thing. Right? And she got it, you know. Right? Maria got it. Because all she does is like, she just looks at me. You know, this is all she does. So we need to have him as the focus of our lives. Nothing else. Regardless of the walks of our life, the many walks of our life, the many functions which we juggle all the time, you know, priest, father, professor, you name it, right? And they're all gathered, we're all piled up with all these burdens. There's only one way. Christ is the solution to everything. Even the solution to this, you could say, human, earthly contacts among us. This is what he gave us. He gave us our health. He's not bossing us around. This is what the message has always been. I'm telling you what your life is, what your health is, what your happiness is. I'm giving it to you. It's my life. Take it. It's all yours. Everything I got is yours. And then we say, no. Excuse me, Lord. I'm a little bit busy here. I'm reading this manual on how to be a good father, right? So can you step back a little bit? And he does step back. Right? Sorry. I don't know if I answered your question,
yes,
but
thank you.
yeah, it's the gaining of Christ. That's it. It's simple. It's the gaining of Christ. The experience of the Holy Spirit, in the words of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, right? Yes. Sorry.
So, when it comes to, Christ and that being like everything, why do we get exhausted whenever we're trying to maintain our spiritual lives?
Yes. We get exhausted because we're trying to maintain our spiritual lives. How could we not? How could we not? So this was quite a little bit of the answer to your question was a part of my talk yesterday. We go about it all the wrong ways. Because we're set up to go about it in all these wrong ways. And we're being set up by things that have changed, very quick run through this, right? Things that have changed over time. And so many things that, for example, the way we experience ourselves, the way we experience our lives, have been determined by all these major shifts in human mentality overall, over centuries. And one of them is actually the first one, the first two side steps, which have impacted us tremendously, were taken 1600 years ago by Augustine. We suffer the way we suffer today, not because it is the only way to suffer, not because it is the only way to struggle, right? But because we were set up to struggle this way. It is not only not the only way, but it's not even the Christian way. Augustine, for the first time, one human being for the first time 1600 years ago, he was presented with a problem. It's exactly what you're talking about. He had a temptation that he couldn't get rid of. And for the first time, to my knowledge, in no other text, the Christian for the first time thinks that problems and burdens and crosses are given to us to be fixed. So for the first time, he doesn't process it through the passage in Luke, this burden of his life, right? That in forbearance, in endurance, you will gain your souls, right? But he says, I need to fix this. It's a huge radical shift in Christian thought. And it impacted almost everything that came after him. Okay, finally, a few hundred years later, once he has a real impact. Right? And he sets us up for this. And there's a second side step he takes. To my knowledge, the first, again, in all of Christendom, right? Everywhere, East and West, everywhere. Not only he says a problem is there to be fixed, but he says, what do I need to read in order to fix it? And it's wonderful because we have this, right? We read it. This is Confessions chapter 7 and 8. Right? The most innovative Christian text of all times. That has ruined our lives more than anything else. We suffer the way we suffer because of that text. So it's all pretty much mandatory reading in all my undergraduate classes, by the way. Because I think my students need to hear that they don't need to suffer this way. There's another way to suffer, in the virtues, in Christ. In forbearance, in patience, in meekness, in all these other things. What do you do when you suffer? You just suffer. Which is precisely what I noticed in my grandparents. They just suffered. And every now and then, true, it may be a lot. It may pile up a lot to the point where we no longer can bear it. And then we talk to Christ. What good will it do? Like St. Paul says, take this away from me. And he says, nope. Don't you realize this is my strength now? Planting itself firmly in your life. And I'm sorry, my son, it will crush you. But this is me. You see, this is the pre-Augustinian way of being. This is the gospel way of being. This is how we deal with our problems. We take up that cross. And by the way, the verb there is very powerful. Right? It doesn't mean to drag it behind us. It literally means to pick it up off the ground. We have proof that what we have been doing for decades now, for centuries, doesn't work. Right? In statistics, we have statistical proof in the number of suicides, the number of depressions, the number of pills, of all these ways of trying to fix, of all these fixes, drugs and self-harm and God knows what else we go to. Because who are us? We have been set up by that guy. Right? That problems are only there to be, unloaded. And many times even things that have to do with the church, even churchly things we treat that way, like confession, right? It's a fix. We turn confession into a fix. And into a place of unloading. And then we wonder why we don't truly unload. In other words, we go home doing precisely the same thing we just confessed this morning. And then we beat ourselves up over it. It's not your fault. There is no other way to be if you do confession that way to begin with. If we live our lives this way to begin with. That's not the Christian way of living life. It's the post-Augustinian way of living life. Right? The Christian way of living life is the gnashing of teeth. Right? Do we have the strength to do it? No, we don't. So I'm not trying to propose something that is also actually post-Augustinian, which is self-mastery. Which, a famous French said is pretty much the substance of postmodernity. The sense that we can master ourselves. So what do we do with our weaknesses? The old way is the following. You go to Christ and you tell him, Lord, you made me. You know me better than I know myself. You take over. You uphold me as you promised that you would. Right? You carry me. I can't carry myself. My legs can't breathe without you. Right? What do you think I've been exercising for the last 2 hours here in front of you, if not Christ? Not because I'm a holy person, but because everything that is happening in my body right now, all this splitting of cells and all this stuff, is Christ. You think my body has the power to do this stuff? I have no power whatsoever. Who do you think asked the question in you? Do you think you have the power to move your lips? Do you see? This is the pre-Augustinian way of living. Right? It is still, nevertheless, a crushing experience because the presence of the Lion of Judah is terrifying. But it comes with this extraordinary peace that I've been God, that I am being held, right? That my God has taken hold of me. And who's going to pry open his hand? Who else is there to pry open that hand? The hand of God himself. So, in other words, short answer, don't do spiritual life this way. As a struggle with yourself, with your inabilities, or even with your abilities. It's, those two things, those two movements we usually go through, even in our own spiritual struggles, are just sides of the same coin. And the substance of the coin is egotism. It's the sense that I myself am actually, and I am able actually to accomplish something. That the fasting that I've done, like that elder, I told you the story I read you, right? The fasting he has done has been his. And the angel told him, you think you fasted, you idiot? It hasn't been you at all. It's been Christ. Why? Because you approached him simply. And you approached him with this. Instead of coming with a plan, God, this is how I want to fast. You told him, Lord, help me out. Help me fast. To the best of my abilities. Don't crush me. Don't come too close, right? Because your presence is crushing. But give me a piece of you. Give me a glimpse. Give me just a tiny finger. Let me hang on to your pinky and carry me with you. Please, Lord. Right? And he will. Without having to go through any psychological traumas. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe I can do more. Why? Because that's an entirely, radically different way of being. That's post-Augustinian. And my goodness, that's full of darkness. Because here, but it's all predicate, it all has the same substance, egotism. I can do more. I can accomplish, I should be doing more. If we even use perversely, even the Gospels, for this perverse purpose. As standards of living. We measure ourselves. It's one of the great insights of St. Paul. It's all over our church fathers. Read, right? St. Isaiah the Solitary. Never analyze yourself. Not in an analytical sense. Never judge yourself. Never condemn yourself. Because you too are somebody else's servant. The substance of relating ourselves to Christ, in any sense that we can actually do something, is actually Antichrist. That's the substance of Antichrist. What do you think it is?
Repeat that sentence again.
Sorry?
Repeat that sentence again.
So the substance of relating ourselves to Christ in this way, that we can actually accomplish something, is actually Antichrist. It's telling God, you step aside, I got this. Lord, I got my life. Okay? This is the actual Greek meaning of Antichrist, a replacement of Christ. Somebody that comes instead of. A fake God. Let's admit, the greatest fake God of our lives is ourselves. Before anything else. We're able to worship all these different idols in the world, right? Our jobs and our accomplishments and all diplomas and God knows what. But we're able to do that only because in the meantime I have replaced Christ with me. Perversely, even in my own spiritual life. Right? With me. I can accomplish something. I am supposed to obey the commandments. No, you're not. You're unable. Otherwise, he just wasted 30-some good years of good life, right? He could have had a good life. But instead, he accomplished the commandments in himself. He gives them to us accomplished, fulfilled. And he basically said, have my life, have at it. Eat up. That's the law. My life, it comes with the law, already fulfilled. Eat it. It's you. I'm giving it to you. So all we have to do is ask for this and have this, as I said, the only needful thing, to always keep our eyes on Christ. Never take our eyes off. To replace Christ with all these different idols. Even the Gospels can turn into an idol. And spiritual life can turn into an idol. The moment we do it with the sense of accomplishment, with the sense of anything. This is what ascetical struggle is for. I'm not trying to say ascetical struggle has no purpose whatsoever. The ascetical struggle is precisely the telling Christ, my Lord, I know I am nothing. It's our cry to Him. It's not an accomplishment. In and of itself has no value. Do you remember that famous encounter that St. Macarius had with the demon? This is the Saints of the Desert Fathers. Not the anonymous, the other ones. They are named. St. Macarius with the demon in the desert. And the demon says, oh, by the way, you are wow, the way you fast, you eat like one slice of bread a week. I've never eaten anything. You spend your whole life, you spend 70 years of your life, or whatever, how many years he spent in his life, till very old age. He lived to be over 100. In the desert. I've lived my whole life in the desert. You struggle for the presence of God. There is not one moment in my whole existence where I didn't feel the presence of God. But there's one thing that differentiates us. It's humility. The attitude Macarius had about life and about himself. This is what it means to be humble. To have this attitude about ourselves, to come to that first realization, the first crisis, and taking the right decision, the right turn, right? The right road at that crossroads, that I am nothing. This is how spiritual life works. And that's all it is. It's a cry. It's not meant to accomplish anything. It'll accomplish things only because they are given to us by Christ. And if it doesn't accomplish anything, we need to trust that this is what's useful to us. We spend decades and decades and decades of our life struggling, and we accomplish precisely nothing. That's the presence of Christ in our life. The fact that we have accomplished nothing. Or others, they struggled very little, and God raised them to these extraordinary heights of holiness, right? But that's also a gift. Just like the fact that I don't have the same thing is a gift. So this is how we ought to relate to our struggles, our spiritual struggle, our fasting, our prayer, our vigils, our prostrations, whatever we do. This is their only... And yesterday I told this, I'm going to end with this, sorry. But it's so relevant to your question today. About this hermit that came to the monastery of Hieron de Emilianos on the Holy Mountain, the monastery of Simon Petra, after spending God knows how many years and decades by himself in a cave somewhere, probably. So he was too sick at the end of his life. So he asked Hieron, can I join your community? He said, well, of course, Father, you're more than welcome to. Because he needed to be taken care of a little bit, right? He could no longer live on his own. But he had this habit. He spent the whole night in vigil doing prostrations. And he was using his cave with being able to make all the noise he wanted without, bothering anyone. But here in the monastery, Simon Petra is built on a rock, right? And this old man, the whole night, he was just knocking the floor with his forehead. Boom, boom. And if you've ever been at Simon Petra, the whole thing resonates, right? If somebody drops a coin at the other end of the monastery, you go like, okay, what elephant fell in what room? So monks couldn't sleep. The fathers couldn't sleep because they were like, boom, boom, every 10 seconds, the whole night. So they immediately realized, okay, it's Father so-and-so, right? So they go to Elder Emilianus and they tell him, they said, please make him stop. Okay, fine. He has this gift, he has this power not to sleep the whole night. This is what God gave him, right? But we need to sleep, Tell him to stop it. So the other thinks, well, it's on me, I'm the abbot. But he also thought the other way. He said, let me check to make sure this father is not deluded. So he calls him to his office. He also gave him a lesson on who's the abbot here. And I can only imagine, because Elder Emilianus was a young abbot. He was in his 40s. He was younger than me when he was the abbot. And he was already venerated this holy person, right? Throughout the Christendom, right? The Orthodox world. But anyway. And he calls this old monk, this terrible ascetic, to him and tells him, and asks him first, Father, what are you doing the whole night? There's this noise. Oh, well, forgive me, Father. I keep, prostrating. Why are you doing this, Father? And this was the test. Why are you doing this? He said, oh, forgive me, Hieronda. I'm so sorry. I won't do this again. I'm only doing this because I want God to hear me. That was it. And then Hieronda says, no, Father, don't worry about it. Just make sure you don't, make the noise. But you are okay. You are okay. He had no delusion that he's accomplishing something. To him, all his effort was a cry to God, my Lord, I know who you are. Right? I'm here. This is all we're doing. This is the only purpose of all our efforts. Not that they accomplish something, but that they express our struggle, our nothingness, to the extent to which they are given to us. So we don't struggle with them. We just don't struggle with them. We don't wonder why we can't do more, why we should be doing more. That's not the proper way to go about it. Right? You see what I mean? I hope. Anyway. Okay, I'll stop. I told you, being a professor means that I can go on and on and on and on and on. The trick is to get me to shut up. That's why at the end of this class periods, well, no, we no longer do that, unfortunately. They should be doing that. That was very smart. This loud ringing. And actually, it was passing us, subliminal message. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Right? That's why my wife keeps telling me, what do you think that ringing was about? Shut up.
Any other questions for Father?
Oh, yes.
I have an off-topic question. So you mentioned you finished translating the Psalter. Do you have a publisher for it yet? Do you have any idea when we'll be able to get one?
Well, so I'll publish it with Cherubim Press. It's done. The first draft is done. I have to look at it one more time. Yes, I have to go through it one more time. And so what's different about this? Well, not the Psalter, right? But it's actually a translation of the dominant Orthodox manuscript tradition. Because our Psalter is not quite the Septuagint, that you can get out there, Ralph's or translations from Ralph's. It's slightly different. Not hugely different, but it has different words, different fluidity to it, right? So I translated, basically, first and foremost, I used 3 different manuscripts. They're all Athanite, and they were published at different times in the 1700s. Yeah. One of them in Romania, of all places, in Snagov in 1700. Greek Psalter published from an Athanite manuscript. So I didn't translate Ralph's Septuagint. Right? So that's what's different. Right. But the most important manuscript is from the monastery of Pantocrator, is manuscript 43 or 53, something. I'm getting tired, I forgot. So that's what's different about it. Yes? Yes, please. Yes, sorry. Sorry, I mean, sometimes this blinds me and I can't see.
In our middle and high school, Sunday school, our theme for the year is based on a lecture by Father Roman Braga, where his emphasis is that Christ is within it. And so we're trying to use that as a theme throughout the year, and I keep being amazed at how many of the Gospels and Epistle readings that's the theme. I never saw it before quite in the same way. Could you comment on that a little more?
In what sense? I mean, yeah.
I think what we've been trying to talk to the kids about is that Christ is within, and then there's, and this, you may disagree based on your thesis, that there's something that we do to open ourselves to that, or to reveal that. And then there's also choices we make to hide it or to turn away from it.
Right.
Is that right, Mary?
I see.
Kind of saying?
Okay. Because that's true. The reason for which, sorry for my follow-up question, but when we say Christ is within, we may mean different things. And it is being said in different ways, I think, in the Gospel themselves. He himself says, right, when he says the Gospel, the kingdom of God is within, right? Within you. Because at one level that is absolutely true, and there's nothing we can do about it. We cannot push Christ out. Not only in the simple sense that we are truly His walking icons, His idols. Right? Christ has images. Our God has had an image from Genesis 1:26, right? A walking image of Him, which is the human being. We are created after the image of Christ. Christ is the first Adam, right? We are the second Adam. Our Adam is the second Adam, made after the prototype of Christ. The image of the invisible God, as St. Paul would put it. He's first. He predates Adam. So that's true at that level. It's also true the fact that, again, He's in everything that I am. Because if He were not, the psalmist says, I would turn into what I am, which is nothing. Right? The human being is... There's this famous Jewish author that translates the concept of vanity as breath, right? Beautiful. Anyway, professor of literature, so he knows how to handle language. We are breath in ourselves. If we have any stability, any life in ourselves, it's Him. It's not us. So Christ is within. If Christ is not within something, that thing just doesn't exist. But He is within us because because of his character, and I think this is very useful for us to emphasize, particularly to our youth, that regardless of how they are toward him, he is in a particular way toward us. We are the thing he needs. Like I quoted tonight from the Psalms, we are the apple of his eye, the pupil of his eye, to be more specific. Right? So to say that Christ is within is truly enveloping, it's truly embracing of what we are, when we no longer talk simply ontology, but we talk the events of my life, and the fact that regardless of what events I go through, I am the one he needs, desperately, to the point where he would be nowhere else but in us. The ancient fathers, particularly the Syriac fathers, for example, expressed this by talking about 3 temples. He said there's 3 temples. God built for himself 3 temples: the celestial temple, the heavenly temple, where the angels liturgize, the temple to which we go, right? The earthly temple, this. And then the ultimate temple of God. The other 2 temples were built for the 3rd one, the human heart. There's no other place God would like to be. And of course, because we are being psychological and we like drama, I guess, we got used to it over centuries. Augustine set us up, as I said. Right? We are being such psychological beings, then we go through all these motions which are not useful to us at all and very crushing, that, well, I don't deserve God to be in this heart. I know how stinky this heart is. That's beside the point. That's not my problem. That's his problem, that he would be nowhere else in this earth except in here. Nowhere else in this universe except in here. He has all the stars and the beauties and all. We try to reach planets, and we peek at galaxies that are far and far away. Imagine, he could travel through all of those, but he says, no, let me be in the human heart. But my Lord, it stinks. He says, no, there's nothing more beautiful to me. It's beyond comprehension. So it's very important to speak of God within at this, how should I say, as this internal existential reality that has to do with how God is. Not with a sense of deserving or not deserving. Deserving has got nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with how he is, with his character, as I said tonight. There's nowhere else he'd rather be but in this body, in this heart.
Can I ask a follow-up then? When you say, I heard you say this last night as well, that God needs us, something about that doesn't sit quite right with me with the idea of what need is.
Right.
But it has something to do with I need for survival, or I need to fill a need. I don't know how to correct what I'm misunderstanding about that.
Right.
How God could need me or my heart versus want, or I don't know how else.
Well, why do I say need? Not because it's not when I say need and when I talk the way in which I talk, we have to leave behind other ways of talking. My language doesn't work neatly, for example, in a framework which is metaphysical. If you want to take my language, the way I talk, and frame it into a world of ideas, oh my goodness, it's just wrong. Not only is it problematic, it's absolutely wrong. But that's not our world. The Orthodox world is a world of experience. And through experience, I know that Christ needs me. Why does he need me? It's not true ontologically. He doesn't need anything. Also, through spiritual life, I'm being taught, through my own struggle with him, I gain this knowledge of him, right? That actually I can do nothing for him. That all of this, all our effort, what do you think it is? It is nothing. What does he want from us? Nothing. What does he need from us in that sense, in a metaphysical sense? Nothing. But yet, he needs everything from us. Why? Because he made himself needful. And he is by character needful because he's humility itself. And therefore, he created me. He had no need for a creature, and he created me. And then he decided. So if you want, his need follows a decision if you want. If this is helpful, you can frame it in a narrative sense and say, okay, there's a story about God. Let me tell you, like you said, how do we talk to kids? Let me tell you, my child, the story of God. The life of God. There was God, Trinity. And then God, when? Dad, break. When? I can't put my finger on it. I have no idea how this works. From all eternity, he said, I'm going to create the world, and I'm going to create the human being. Dad, break. Why? I don't know. This is how God is. He just creates the world. And then God says, and at some point he creates the angels first, and even the angels tell him, are you sure? You know what they'll do, right? You experience time differently. You've already been to the end, right? Yes. Are you sure? Absolutely. And I'll tell you what. Not only I will create the human being, and not only this human being will mess up badly, and this human being will kill me, but there's nothing else I would rather do but being killed by him. This is the goal of my life, you see. So how can God even think that way? Philippians 2, because that's how simple he is. He is God. His humility, his selflessness. He's not like us. This is where he's radically different from us. Because we're people, we're so proud. Come on, let's admit it. Like Jeroen Lennes put it once. He said, we're people. So we imagine ourselves to amount to something. And therefore, we never truly bow down to God. So do you know what happened? What needed to happen in a way? He came and bowed down to us. And he's been bowing down to us for thousands of years. And he needs it because this is his character. Because he has no sense of, look at me, I'm God. Right? That's not God. So he has this extraordinary need that he cannot fight in a way. So you see, it all depends on how we use our language, and actually the framework in which we use our language. These are spiritual realities. The moment we try, and that's why I constantly keep saying our word and the world of Orthodoxy doesn't work in an ideatic way, in a metaphysical way. Because the moment we try to translate it into metaphysics, it just doesn't work. The real thing, the only thing that truly works metaphysically is Calvinism. Like I said this morning, it was like a charm. It's like a Swiss clock. Okay, it's a system unbreakable. Everything is logical, argumentative, counter-argumentative. It holds all intellectual, all logical water. You can't break down that system. But the life of Christ is not a system. The life of Christ, more than a system, rather than a system, is poetry. This is what God wants. God wants our hearts to sing. Not to align just the proper ideas in the proper way, the most logical way. He wants us to sing. Our life is liturgical. It's not, you see. And actually, the moment you try to translate, it all becomes very shaky. It doesn't work in those other frameworks. We run into troubles immediately. So therefore, right, Calvinism is much better. Because it just makes sense. So yes, in a way you say, I can't wrap my head around what you mean by need. And you shouldn't speak that way. Yes, and in another framework, it's just not true. It's completely wrong. I'll give you that. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about my discovery in my own, actually not my discovery, what I've been told by the saints that I've met in my life, and saints to whom I confessed. I had one of them for a confessor recently. They want to canonize him. He was a holy person. And he revealed these things to me as a matter of experience. Right? As a crushing experience. It was a dimension of their existential crisis, to which I referred earlier. This is spiritual life, an existential crisis, done properly. Right? Talking about Father Justin's question, done properly. Well, probably that's the wrong way of putting it, because again, right, that itself is a trap. Properly. To process it, to turn it into a process, right, where things just work, right? But as a matter of existential crisis, this is it. Because we also need to ask ourselves, what else would make my God to do this? Theories, atonement, and all this other stuff? Really? Isn't this the mistake that Job is making at the very end? That there is a system that governs both him and God? That ultimately there's this thing which is called mechanics, in which part God is just, it's himself, just a wheel among other wheels. Okay, he's the biggest wheel, okay? And because he's the biggest, he kind of we can impute him. I use this way of talking, on purpose. We can impute him the fact that he's the mover of all things, blah blah blah. And here we are in the beautiful world of ideas, right? That's not what I'm talking about. Why did God create in the first place? And our fathers themselves, many of them, the holy people, right, that came before us, they told us, because He's love. There's no other. I mean, how else do we process this extraordinary thing, that this thing even exists? But as a need. As a need to love. As a need to share Himself. What does love want to do if not to give itself away? This is how St. Basil frames it, right? And St. Gregory Nyssa too, the brothers. Right? God wanted to give Himself away. And for all eternity, He's been giving Himself, to each other, right? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But they wanted a fourth member there, not equal on their footing. See, as soon as you translate this into the doctrine, you go like, well, this is against the concept of Trinity. But I'm not doing concepts here to begin with. Like our fathers, I'm convinced they haven't been doing concepts. They spoke the experience of prayer. This is prayerful from moment zero till infinity, although infinity is not a moment. But it's an addition of moments, right? That goes on and on and on. So how do you express that? I express it as need. Why? Because I'm absolutely... So again, I don't think or process my language in any other ways but along these two concerns that prevail in all patristic literature. First one is usefulness. We need to speak in such ways that we are useful to our fellow human beings. Everything else is not truly theological. Right? Even when they did doctrine because it was useful. Right? So I think it is useful for us to frame. That's why the fathers actually talk differently, although they speak the same reality over centuries. The Millennials spoke in ways which are so radically different, even from other contemporary saints, because the people that surrounded him in his own lifetime needed to hear precisely that. These were broken people that struggled. Many of them, he was particularly a magnet to high schoolers of all people. Actually, his community, 90% of it, was made by kids he was teaching in his own high school, because he was also a high school teacher for a while. He was talking to these kids, and they later on became his monastics. Because he just wanted to be useful. And I am convinced today, I don't know how I know it, it's just something that I feel, I experience, that I need to speak in this way. Why? Maybe it's not useful to me at all, but it's useful to the kids that hear me. Right? So that they take the burden off themselves. We're not supposed to be able to carry anything. Ants that we are, we're not supposed to be. We're a peculiar type of ants, incapable of carrying any weight. Let alone 50 times the weight of their own body, as ants are able to, actual ants. We're peculiar ants, we're incapable of anything. But it's useful to them to know that nevertheless they're being carried. And they will never be dropped. Why? Because God has a need to carry them. He is incapable of not carrying them. I don't know, does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm thinking, as you're saying this, about one of my favorite lines from Father Thomas Hopko, and it's my favorite sermon topic, which is, he says, you cannot understand orthodoxy or experience it unless you first experience paradoxy. Orthodoxy is paradoxy, he says. God doesn't need any of us, and yet He needs us.
And then He needs us, right?
God is, we are called to be nothing, and yet He says, you're everything to me.
Yes.
These are both true.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and Lasky opens his famous book, The Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church, right? With this, right? In the opening chapter. Orthodox theology is paradoxical. And that's why the proper venue for talking about these things is poetry, is liturgy, is hymnography. Right? And that's why our church fathers, we don't pay attention to them. How many times they tell us, do not preoccupy yourselves with doctrines. And yet, we make doctrines the heart of our faith. And actually, we're being set up by Basil. There's theological developments, particularly in the Middle Ages, right? the intellectualization of faith, right? Anyway, we're being set up to process this way. But actually, we shouldn't think doctrinally. It's not useful to us. See the dominating concern that they had for things that are useful. And again they say, don't do that. You watch out for your soul. Right? And if you are able to carry doctrines, do. But watch out, you may not be able to. And then you switch your attention away from Christ. Your God and your King, as the psalmist says. Right? And you turn your attention to his teaching. Even his teachings can be turned into idols if we have these different attitudes. Forgive me.